Heat is one form of energy which we do not need during the summer. We do not want heat during summer. In summer, we want to avoid heat. But opposite will happen during the winter, because in winter we need heat. We want more heat. So these are the different aspects of heat. Hello everyone, today I will talk about heat and heat transfer. Theoretically, heat is defined as the one form of energy which is in transient condition. One very interesting fact is that if there is no heat in the kitchen, then we need to live without food, because food cannot be prepared if there is no heat available inside the kitchen. So if there is no heat, we all need to live without food. And coming to heat transfer, I would say that heat transfer is one of the most difficult subjects in engineering. But today I will explain the heat transfer in simple way, so that you can understand the heat transfer in general way, and in easy process you will have a realization how heat transfer will take place. So heat transfer is divided into main three mechanisms or main three modes. In other way, heat transfer will happen in three different mechanisms. The first mechanism is conduction. Second mechanism is convection, and the third one is radiation. So starting with the first heat transfer mechanism, conduction. And basically we know that conduction is a mode of heat transfer where the heat will flow from one place to another place by the contact of the molecules or contact of the body. Clear? So basically in solid the conduction will take place. So heat conduction will take place for the solid material. So in case of conduction, we will get the heat transfer from hotter region to the cooler region of the same body, or maybe of different body. So this conduction is taking place by the virtue of the contact of the molecule or atoms inside the material. Okay. Now you can ask, what are the factors, what are the parameters on which conduction depends? To understand the parameters where conduction depends, we must know the Fourier's law. Fourier's law is the basis of any conduction process, where we can understand how conduction will depend on different factors. The conduction will vary with the property of the material. So this material property or the thermal conductivity is the first factor on which the conduction depends. Second condition is the temperature difference. How much temperature difference is there? If there is two region of any solid body, depending on the temperature difference, the heat flow will depend. If there is a more temperature difference, there will be more heat flow. If there is a less temperature difference, then automatically the heat transfer amount will be less. So the third factor on which the conduction is depending on is the thickness of the material. So if the material is very thick, the heat transfer will be less. So when the thickness of material will be very small, in that case conduction heat transfer will be more. So depending on the thickness of the material, our conduction heat transfer will be changing. And the fourth condition on which conduction is depending is the area. So more the area, more heat transfer will take place. If area is small, less heat transfer will take place. So finally we have found that conduction heat transfer is depending on main four parameters. One is property of the material, thermal conductivity. Second one is the temperature difference. Third one is the thickness of the material. Fourth one is the area of the material. Convection is the a second mechanism of heat transfer where the heat flow will take place due to the movement of the molecules, okay, due to the motion of the fluid particles. Convection is normally taking place in the fluid, that is liquid or gas. So in case of liquid or in case of gas, the whatever heat transfer will take place, that is known as convection. And here the convection heat transfer will be occurred due to the movement of the molecules of the gas or liquid, or due to the motion of the fluid particles or gas particles. So this is the the convection. And as an example, we can say the boiling of water. When we boil the water by heating process, the convection will take place, okay, due to the movement of the water molecules. So the very basic formula for the heat convection is the Newtonian law. So in the basic formula of heat convection, we find that convection heat transfer will depend on three main factors. The first one is H, the heat transfer coefficient. Second one is area. Clear? So on the area, this convection is depending. Third one is temperature difference. Directly this heat transfer of convection is proportional to these three parameters. And heat transfer coefficient is not easy term. It's a very difficult or complex term which is depending again on multiple factors. So convection is simply looking very simple, but in actual this convection heat transfer is very difficult. So it is very difficult to find out the H, because H is depending on multiple factors. So radiation is actually the heat transfer which is taking place due to the electromagnetic waves. So the very basic example of radiation is the sunlight, the heat we are receiving from the sun. The sun is constantly radiating. So whatever energy or heat energy we are getting from the sun, that is the example of radiation. So radiation heat transfer is happening due to the electromagnetic waves of the light. Again, this radiation heat transfer is depending on different factors, different parameters. So one very important fact about the radiation is that for radiation no medium is required. As we found that for convection process we need a medium which is liquid or gas. For the conduction we have got the medium which is solid. But in case of radiation, no medium is required. And the another very important fact about the radiation is that all the material, all the bodies, okay, at their absolute temperature, they radiate. They transfer heat from their body. For example, in this room, my body itself is radiating. Okay, my body itself is transferring heat through the radiation. So this is the very beauty of the case, that radiation will take place from all surrounding bodies at absolute temperature. So you can take the example of the books. Books are also constantly radiating heat, and for whatever materials we have in this particular room or we have in any other place, all the materials, all the bodies are constantly radiating heat. So this is very special feature of radiation. Then we can say that all the bodies which are available surrounding, they are transferring heat from their body due to their absolute temperature. So we can say that temperature difference is not needed. So in case of radiation, temperature difference is not needed. From any body which is having its absolute temperature, it will radiate heat. It will transfer the heat using the radiation. So this is the beauty of radiation. So that's all for today. I have tried to make you understand what is heat, what is heat transfer subject. As I said, heat transfer subject is one of the toughest subjects in engineering. But today, through this video, I understood that you have learned the heat transfer and heat in very general way.